Well, good morning. It's good to be with you guys. My name is David Black. I'm the campus pastor here, and if you've not met, I'd love to do that. Something that we say often, and we mean it here, and I've been saying it a lot lately. It doesn't make it less true because it's repeated, but that following Jesus is costly, but it doesn't have to be lonely. And what that means is that whether you are a follower of Jesus and you come in today, or whether you're just checking out Jesus, our hope is that you would hear from God, and at the very least, leave with a community of people in which to explore Jesus and ask questions. And so just glad that you're here. This is a part of the morning where we actually open up the Bible, and what we say is we're opening up God's heart, and we have to see what his heart has to say about our heart. That's kind of what happens every time you open this thing up. And we have been doing that in a series just entitled Ruth, A Harvest Tale. And so the reason that we're looking at Ruth is a book in the Old Testament. And it's an interesting story that actually has a lot to say. Ruth, the book of the Bible and the story of it takes place at a very difficult time in the history of Israel and God's people. And so we've been saying that Ruth is a story that is full of love and loss, full of a lot of difficulty and possibility. It's also full of regret. It's full of redemption. And what we're doing each week is, Ruth is only 4 chapters long, so every week we are zooming in on a chapter and looking at what's happening in this story. And then we want to zoom out and see kind of a bigger picture of what God is doing. And so as we zoom in, you might see some people that remind you of yourself. And our hope is that you would kind of look at that, and maybe it might serve as a mirror for you. And then as we zoom out, our hope is that we might see that God is actually behind the scenes, always working and doing something. And so you might say, well, again, Ruth, that's an old story. What does that have to do with me? And last time we covered chapter 1, we said this, that Ruth is really for people who are at a point and going, like, I don't know if I can hang on any longer. Ruth is for people who are questioning whether God even is there. Ruth is for people who are kind of going through the motions and wondering if it's really worth doing. Ruth is for people who have said, man, I thought life was going to be one way, but it's completely the opposite. And so last week, chapter 1, we said this, that Ruth, the chapter 1, if I could sum it up for you, if you were not here, I'd encourage you to go back and look at it online. But a quick synopsis would be this, that chapter 1 of Ruth is real life and real problems and how real people respond when life turns real bad. And in the very beginning of Ruth, it opens at a time in Israel's history where we're told that everybody did what was right in their own eyes. In other words, you do you, right? Everybody did whatever was right in their own eyes. And we're told the story, there's a guy named Elimelech who, when life got really bad, there was a famine in the land, life got really bad, he decided to compromise. And he picked up his family and moved them to a land where God told people not to go. And God told people not to go there because the people there were worshiping demons, they were killing their kids, and they were sacrificing their idols and doing a bunch of other stuff. Or sacrificing to idols. And he's like, you know what? I think it's better off for my family to be there. So he picks them up and moves them there. He compromised. And there, life was okay for a little while, but over the course of 10 years, it continued to get real bad. In fact, Elimelech eventually died. And not only did Elimelech die, but his sons grew up. They married Moabite women from that culture, and then they passed away. And so we're left with 3 women, all of who are widows, living in a land of crazy, just all kinds of stuff, at a time when there's no food and they don't know what to do. And over time, they hear that back in Bethlehem, which is Israel, back where Naomi came from, who was the mother, Orpah and Ruth were the 2 daughters. These 3 women decided to make their way back to Bethlehem, and on their way back home, Naomi goes, what are you girls doing? I'm old, our husbands are dead, you don't know where you're going, your home is back in Moab. Don't come home with me, go back to your people. If I was to just have kids again, and you were to wait on other sons and other people in my family, which was a custom back then. I know that's a little weird for us. But like, you wouldn't have kids. There's nothing for you to where we're going. And Orpah goes, okay, and she goes back home. But Ruth says, no, I'm coming with you. And when Naomi comes back into town, she walks back in poor, with no husband, and a Moabite daughter-in-law who would have been an outcast. And Naomi got real bitter. In fact, she said, don't call me Naomi anymore, which means sweet. Call me Mara, which means better. Bitter, because God has dealt harshly with me. I left full, and now I'm back and I'm empty. So Elimelech compromised when things got real bad. Naomi chose bitterness. But Ruth was the daughter-in-law who looked at Naomi and said, where you're going, I'm going. And your people will be my people. And your God will be my God. And she chose to leave home to go to a foreign land that she didn't grow up in a people who would look at her as harshly and judge her, because she chose Naomi and her God over turning back home. And we said she clung to hope. And so where we pick back up today in chapter 2 is right there. They've just rolled into town. We've just said, hey, it looks like things are starting to turn because there's a barley harvest coming up. And what I want to do today is pick up right there, if I could, and begin to talk through the rest. We're going to read the whole chapter together, go through that story, and then we'll make a few observations this morning. Here's where we are, Ruth chapter 2. It'll be on your screen, but I want you to read this in color, not in black and white. In other words, you may have heard it before, you might hear things and names that you don't know, but read it as real people, because that's what's really happening here. These are real people with real problems, and lives got real bad. Now, Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. This is the narrator telling you and me this. Naomi doesn't know about this yet fully. Ruth doesn't know full about it, but they start off and going, now, there's a guy who is a worthy man. That word worthy means rich. It means rich in every way you could think about. You'll see in a moment, but Boaz would be a guy who would be rich in reputation. He was rich in wealth and finances and possessions. He was rich in character, and he was rich when it came to his spiritual relationship with God. This was a guy who was strong. In fact, the name Boaz means strength. Okay? So there's a guy, we're told, there's a strong man, a rich man in all areas who is in Israel. And Ruth, the Moabite, they won't let you drop that, right? Hey, don't forget, she's a Moabite. Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, so this is a daughter saying to the mom, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose eyes I shall find favor. What's going on? Well, in that day and age, when you did not have anything, remember, these women, they're powerless. They have no husband in that culture. That would have been an issue. That would have been a way you find protection and care and standing. They have no money. They got nothing. They can't even rub two pennies together. And so Ruth goes, I'm going to go out to the field, and I'm going to go behind the guys who are harvesting, and I'm going to pick up the scraps. And in fact, that you'll see in a little bit, we'll talk about it, that's something that God actually told people to do on purpose for those who didn't have anything. So Ruth's she's like, look, I'm not going to sit around. I'm going to go and actually get out in the field. I'm going to start picking up what they're dropping, and at least we'll have some food. And she said to her daughter, Naomi said to Ruth, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was the clan of Elimelech. Dun, dun, dun. She happened to. Some versions would say, as chance would have it. In fact, the Hebrew there is, as chance chanced. That sounds weird to us. We'd say, as it lucked out, the field she came to was that one. And she begins to work. Can you feel it, right? There's like, okay, what's going on? And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Okay, she just didn't happen to come on any day. She came on the day when the undercover boss was not undercover. He came to inspect his field. He traveled there to look. So she happens to show up day one on the day that the boss is there, and we find out something about Boaz's character. He walks in on a Monday morning and goes, God bless all y'all. Now, I know you work for people just like that, right? That's what your boss says to you when you show up. But he walks in, and then they turn back around, and they go, yeah, right. No, they say, the Lord bless you. So he's this kind of guy that you'd kind of want to work for there a little bit. And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man, that would be the like manager who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? Now that sounds very like, he's not saying who owns this lady. That's us going like, what's going on over there? What's with that? He notices there's something different. There's a Moabite in his field gleaning. Now listen to the report of this guy. Look how many times he says Moabite. She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. Okay? I don't know, but she's the lady who came with, remember she's Moabite. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Let me sum that up. That's that Moabite woman, but man, can she work. She's been working hard, except for a short rest. Then Boaz said to Ruth, wait, what? Hold on. So Boaz meanders over to where Ruth is. And now you have the wealthy, in every aspect, Israelite landowner talking to the poor in every aspect, Moabite woman, and Boaz comes over to talk to her. And you got to be thinking, if I'm her, I'm like, oh, what's going to happen? Where's this going? Boaz says to Ruth, now listen, my daughter. I got to wonder if that's the first kind word she's heard from a stranger since she's been in Israel. Listen, my daughter, do not glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women, meaning the people who would be working. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? What? He's like, hey, here's what I want you to do. Don't worry about working anywhere else. I want you to follow my employees, and as they go around, you go around. And by the way, no one's going to mess with you, because I said if they're messing with you, they're messing with me. Oh, okay. And when you are thirsty, go draw some water from the well. That's not what he says. Go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. What? Now, in that culture, man, women go to the well. That's what they did. Men drank from pitchers of water that women draw from. And he's going, you know those guys who are hard working over there? I want you to go to them and get their water. They're working for you. Okay? Oh, wow. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I'm a foreigner? Why? Well, one, she's hard working. We know that. She cares about her mom. We know that. But Boaz answered to her, look at what he says. You got a reputation, Ruth. All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. And how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to the people that you didn't know before. He doesn't say that's why I'm doing it. Look at what he says. The Lord repay you for what you have done. The Lord, not me. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. This man is somebody. He's responding favorably to her. He's pointing her to the Lord. Then she says, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I'm not one of your servants. Look at how they're talking to each other. Now, look, I'm not a rocket scientist, but you guys were in middle school. You went through high school. Are we just talking, or is something else going on? Right? Is this like Boaz doesn't walk up and go, how you doing? Right? He doesn't do that. But he walks up and he's like, here, have this. And she's like, who are you? And he's like, I know who you are. I know all about you. Really? Okay. And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. What? So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed her roasted grain. We're on a date. The Moabite poor woman is sitting at a table with the land guy, wealthy dude, and they're passing grain back and forth. Here, try this. This is a Chateau de blah, blah, blah. It was aged 50 years. It's okay, right? And she ate until she was satisfied and she had some left over. I wonder if that's the first time she'd been full in a while. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves. That means not the stuff that's dropped. Let her go into the field and harvest and get what she wants. Don't reproach her. That means don't look down on her. And also pull some out from her. So now these guys are like, hope I dropped something. Here you go. Like that's what they're working for her, right? And don't rebuke her. She gleaned in the field until evening. She put in a 13-hour day. Then she beat out what she had gleaned. They would thresh it out, and you get down the ground the grain. And the grain was about an ephah of barley. Now, that doesn't mean anything for us. Let me just read and finish. And she took it up and went to the city. The ephah of barley, you're like, okay, what's that? You would have gasped. Okay, that's 2 weeks' worth of wages. It's anywhere from 40 to 60 pounds. Ruth was no young maiden who just sits in the shade, okay? Don't miss that while Boaz is talking to her, it's not like she's got makeup on and is like all dolled up. She is pretty scruffy right now, right? Like she's sweating. She's been working all day and she's sitting at the field with this guy. And then she wraps up her day by throwing 40 to 60 pounds of barley on her back and walks home. Okay. Naomi waited up for her. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. Like, imagine that. I went to the grocery. You got all this, right? She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. Also, I got stuff from a table. Look at all this. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? Where did you get this? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. In other words, I don't know his name, but that guy, thank the Lord for that dude, right? And then she goes, so she told the mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. And Naomi goes, what? And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. In other words, man, how awesome is God? Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours and one of our redeemers. You mean you're telling me that the guy who gave you all this stuff happens to be the guy who's one of the wealthiest in the area and just happens to be the dude who's a close relative of ours? What? You could have said a lot of names, but when you said Boaz, Naomi sits up in her seat and she goes, I know that name. And Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. Like, she's like, this is a good thing we got going on. She said, so she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. End scene. A little anticlimactic. I mean, there's a lot going on there, but you're like, what happened next? Now, there's a couple ways that when you read, we could approach this passage. Both are good, okay? Some people read this, and they would be like, let's talk about what it means to be someone who loves the Lord, who's a guy, and someone who loves the world, who's a lady, and how you relate to one another. And quite honestly, there's a lot in this passage that could be said for that, but we're not in a romantic or a relationship series this morning. That's not what we're doing, okay? So come back for that one. But how else might we then look at this? Well, I think there is something here that really does matter to those of us who feel like we might be losing hope or holding on barely. Yeah. In World War II, there was a story that began to take some traction about some fighter planes who took off from an aircraft carrier. And they would go out on missions in which they would be searching for enemy bombers and enemy fighter planes and any submarines. And one day they were out all day, out looking for the enemy. Well, unbeknownst to them, while they were out looking, the fleet themselves got word that the enemy was actually close by. Enemy submarines and ships were close by. I don't know if you've ever been on the ocean, or out on the lake, or out on the sea, but light travels very far in a dark expanse, even a little bit of light. So as soon as the aircraft carrier got word and the battle group understood that there'd be a sub in their area, they ordered a complete blackout. Now that means that everything on the ship goes dark because they don't want to be noticed. Everything slows to a halt. While they were doing this, it began to get dark in the day. And so it's getting into the dark of night, and these planes are coming back. Well, as the planes are coming back, it's World War II, right? They don't have the advancement that we have today of GPS. They're looking for their aircraft carrier to land. They can't find it. And as they're coming back, they're realizing that they're running low on fuel, and they had not planned a contingency for this. And so they're talking back and forth with their tower, saying, "Where are you? We can't find you." And they're trying to give them their coordinates and things. But after a while, it became evident that no matter what they did, they would have to ditch at sea. So as things got almost to the last minute, we're told that from the very control tower of the aircraft carrier, someone managed to take a little lighter out of their pocket and cup it and point it in the direction that they thought the fighter planes were there. And one of them saw it. And because they saw it, they were actually able to land, and they didn't have to ditch into the ocean. Okay? Chapter 2 of Ruth is this. Chapter 1, it's really dark. In chapter 2, God turns on a little light in the life of Ruth and Naomi and you and me. And it can be found in this word that keeps getting repeated all through the chapter. And that word is a little odd for us, but it's the word favor. So look at this, chapter 2, verse 2, "Let me go into the field and glean among the ears of the grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor." Comes up again in verse 10 in her conversation. "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I'm a foreigner?" And then verse 13, again, out of Ruth's mouth, "I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to me, your servant." And so this word favor, you can forget all this right after you leave, but I think it's interesting. This word favor in Hebrew is actually the word chen, okay? And we would say CH, but it's actually HEN. They just pronounce it with a in their throat. So you got a chen, that's what it is. And it's translated, that's where we get our word grace from in the Bible. It could be beauty or pleasant, and often when a greater acknowledges a lesser. Right? So when somebody shows favor to somebody else. We see this all throughout the Bible. And so we're told that Noah, when he was living in a time when everyone else was doing their own thing, God looked at Noah, Genesis 6:8, and says this, "But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." Grace, pleasant, sweetness. There's something there that God sees. We're also told, another section, that Moses was talking to the Lord and says this, "The Lord told Moses, I'll do the very thing that you have said because you have found favor in my sight and I know you by name." In other words, there's something there that's a little bit there. I'm choosing to put some favor. Okay, it's also later on in the story of Esther and Mordecai and Haman. This is a different story in the Bible, and we see this coming from Esther. She's talking to the king and said, "If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the things seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in the eyes." Okay, you see, it has that connotation. And while gracious might be the act of the person being favorable to another, favor, chen, is actually the recipient's word. It's going like, "Oh, for some reason, you're showing me favor or grace." I almost said it again. This is what it is. Yep. If I had a cold, today would be the perfect day for it, right? And just get all that moving around. But it's there. And so we have this beginning to get a glimpse of what this word is. And some of it makes sense in our culture because we'll use it this way. We'll begin to talk about the weather. And so if I told you that the weekend weather report looked like this, right here, next slide. Yep. If it looked like this, you're like, "Oh, that's very pleasant." We even see it there. It's a favorable forecast. It's favorable. We'll use it. Like it's gonna be great. You might walk the day when you grab your pumpkin spice latte and you have your scarf on and it's like leaves are falling and it's favorable. It's great. We'd also say things this way. If we have something that we enjoy or like, it's my favorite, right? We're putting grace or we're seeing beauty in it. We're saying there's something there. Some of you have a favorite t-shirt that your spouse hates because you've had it your whole life and it's got holes in it, but it's your favorite. And people look at that and go, why do you like that? And you're like, it's my favorite. I don't know, it's just my favorite. There's something about it. That's the relationship that I have there, okay? Additionally, favor can also mean applause. Like, so if you sit and you watch a beautiful show or listen to a beautiful piece of music or watch a performance where you're like, man, I would have never thought that person, like when you're watching America's Got Talent, if you do that, or if you go back and see any clips on YouTube where it's like somebody comes out and you're like, what are they going to do? And then it's just like they tear the roof off, and you're like, what? That little skinny guy has that voice, and everyone starts applauding because they realize there's something to this person, right? They're there. They've got talent, and that's where that favor comes from. I say, why would this be important? Why what's going on here? Well, because in the middle of a very dark time, and a time when there's no hope, you have a woman who goes, I'm empty, I'm bitter, and a Moabite lady who's poor and an outcast from society. And God tells us in chapter 2, for some reason, God has favor for those who don't deserve it, can't afford it, and feel forgotten. For some reason, God is the type of God who has favor for people and things that other people would look at and go like, why is that your favorite? Why do you even care about that? They don't deserve it. They can't afford it. And they feel forgotten. I say, what do you mean? Well, we see that in Boaz and Ruth's relationship, right? She doesn't deserve what Boaz gives to her. In fact, we told this in one of the commentaries I read. Gleaning or gleaners were often unwanted in the fields. They were chased off and shooed away by the field owners, like rabbits caught devouring the farmer's crops. Many landowners were hard-hearted and cruel toward the unwanted gleaners who sought entrance into their fields. Oftentimes, they would set specific times when the gleaners could glean, not allowing them to even be in the fields until after the field had been reaped and the barley bundled and taken away. In other words, Boaz didn't have to do this. The culture at the time, people remember, we're just back from a famine. So this is the first barley harvest you'd had. There's a lot of people who were like, you know what? We'll catch them on the next time around. Or how about the gleaners come at 8 p.m.? We'll see what's left. Let them come in after that. But that's the opposite of what Boaz does. Boaz overflows with favor for Ruth, disproportionately. There's a lot of things that were similar about them. Both had a reputation that preceded them. But Boaz was wealthy and Ruth was poor. There's no reason economically, socially, spiritually, no reason that they should have been out talking to each other. And yet Boaz looks at the person who doesn't deserve anything and begins to throw food and wine and care. I just wrote down what came to mind. Look at Boaz acknowledges her presence. Didn't have to do that. Boaz gentle words for her, speaks tenderly to her. Boaz provides for her. He protects her. He affirms her work, right? He doesn't dismiss her, be like, let me help you out, dearie. He's like, you're working hard. Keep going. Blesses her faith in God. Hey, it's a good thing. He's caring for her spiritually and pointing her to the true God. Recognizes her character, satisfies her hunger. He invites her to his table and sends her away full. That's crazy. And yet, that's how Boaz deals with her. We'll see later on throughout the book that Ruth never leaves Boaz without Boaz giving her something. She never goes home empty-handed. I know we're going to talk about relationships, but maybe just for a second. Ladies, you want a guy who, when you leave, has given you something. Spiritually, physically, maybe not, okay. Relationally. It's a bad habit. We just run down the list. Spiritually, maybe economically, but who's giving you like, not that you're in debt, but somebody who cares for you and is like, I want you to leave better than when I found you. Guys, you want to do that. You want to look at somebody that you're pursuing and go, hey, not what's in it for me and how can you serve my needs, but how might I, even if this doesn't go where I think it's going to go, how might you leave better with the Lord than when I found you? Better emotionally than when I found you. Better in your trajectory of life, wherever that take you. All right, that's enough. Done. Commercial over. Let me get back on my actual slides. Jesus tells a parable about something like this, about people who didn't deserve it. And yet that's the type of favor God has. Jesus says the kingdom of God is like this. It's like a guy who owned a field, and he hired people to work for the day, and he said, I'll give you $10. Let's make it $100. I'll give you $100 for today's labor. And they said, great. And then at noon, he realized he needed more people in his field. So he went at noon and found people and said, I'll give you $100 for half a day. It's wages and work. And they're like, okay. And then he needed more people, so he went, like, closing times like 6. He went at 5 p.m., and he's like, I need people to go in at the last hour and help clean up. I'll pay you $100. And they're like, all right. So they all go, and at the end of the day, he pays them all $100, and they're looking at each other, and the people who worked all day look at the people who were there for an hour, and they go, hey, man, you can't pay them $100. And Jesus looks at them as the landowner and goes, why not? And what Jesus is trying to say is that the favor of God is like that. It's not based on fairness. Sometimes I think that God's favor is based on fairness, right? Sometimes I look around at the world in the midst of my dark time or my difficulty or when I'm losing hope, and I look at somebody else and I go, God, why are you doing that to them? Not doing that with me. I work harder than them. I've not morally screwed up in the way that they've screwed up. God, I've been doing this since I was a kid, and they just came to know you. Like, what in the world's going on there? Isn't it easy to think that God's favor is about fairness? You know what it's not? It's not about fairness. It's actually about his faithfulness. That's what it is. He's like, I'm going to be faithful to people who don't deserve it because that's the type of God that I am. James, writing about this in the New Testament, says this. He says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like the shifting shadows. What? Here's what that means. He's like, hey, you know how you can set your watch, which they didn't have, by the sun? You know how we navigate and sail by the stars? We steer our life by these big things that are up in the sky that help us direct. You want to know what you could set your watch by and steal your life by? The goodness of God. That's what you can do. And so we see that God's heart here is for those who can't deserve it. And it's funny because Boaz is the one who's doing all the overflowing, but understand that Boaz is doing that because he understands something about God. In fact, the whole principle of that God has favor for those who don't deserve it, can't afford it, and feel forgotten, it comes from the Old Testament, because as God is writing in his law to his people, he writes in a law about gleaners. Look at what it says in Leviticus 23. 22, it says this: when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap the edges of your field. So imagine a square. We're going to reap a circle. And do not reap the very edges of your field or gather and gleaning in your harvest. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God. Meaning, do this, guys, not because I say so and because I'm your boss. What he's saying is do this because this is who I am. And you're my people, so you should reflect who I am. And my heart is for the widow. God has a special place in his heart. There's 4 people that show up time and time again next to each other: the widow, the orphan, the foreigner, and the poor. And sometimes God says 2 of them, and he's meant to fill in the rest: the widow, the orphan, the foreigner, and the poor. Ruth is 3 of those things, right? And God had told his people, my heart, who I care about them. I don't forget the forgotten. That's what God is saying. Like, I have margin for the marginalized. I don't neglect the neglected. That's what he's doing. And at some point in time, we have to ask ourselves, right? Do I do that? Boaz is just being obedient to who God is. He knows what his God is like, and he's just passing that through on to Ruth. I don't know if anyone has ever helped you out in that way before. One time, early on in church planning life, man, we were on a strict budget, man. I remember like when we were like, we don't know if we just have enough at the end. We're barely got enough at the end of the month. And we need new tires on our car. Tires are one of those things that, especially as a young person, you're like, wait, what? That's no fun. And just to tell you, as an older person, it's still no fun, right? But it's very important because it's the only thing on your car that touches the ground, and that's the way it should stay, right? So you should buy tires. And I just remember thinking, I don't know what we're going to do for this. They're like, and I remember just talking to some guys, and afterwards a gentleman came up to me after a Bible study, and he said, hey, man, I was talking to some of these dudes. We want to give you this. We want you to go and buy tires. And I remember thinking, oh, man, that's super generous. And I just remember looking at them and going, man, you don't have to do that. And he said, I know I don't have to. We want to. Because that's what God does for us, isn't it? And I'm like, that is what God does for us. See, God isn't a God who has to do this. He does it because he wants to. And what's fascinating is, do you know who I thanked for the tires besides that guy? God. Don't miss the fact that our obedience to God might be somebody else's example of his faithfulness to them, right? Oh my goodness, I've learned something about God because of Boaz. Ruth learned something more about God because of Boaz's favor and obedience to this. We have to ask ourselves, is there a margin for the marginalized? Do I neglect the neglected? Am I willing to be that for somebody else? But also we see, again, that God has favor for those who don't deserve it. God has favor for those who can't afford it. Man, he has favor for those who feel forgotten. Because at the end, what happens? Ruth busts in the door, and she's like doing that weird, awkward walk because she's got 40 pounds of grain and a bag full of like wine and food and bread left over, collapses down in front of Naomi. And Naomi's like, now we're talking, right? Remember, look at what Naomi says. She says this. Here's her response. May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Now, there's some debate about who she's talking about. Whose kindness? Is she saying, now may Boaz be blessed by the Lord because Boaz's kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead? That's a possibility. But most commentators, and I would argue, that what she's actually saying is that this is attached to the Lord. That it's the Lord. This woman who goes, what'd she say last? Where'd we leave her? I've come back empty. Call me Mara, for the Lord has dealt bitterly with me, right? I've got no hope. This bitter, empty, call me by a different name woman, for the very first time, looks and goes, God has not forsaken the living and the dead. You think she felt forgotten before this? 100%. 100%. By the way, if that's you, I love this because it's not unfair or off limits to ask the question. Psalm 77 is a great example of this. This is an author writing to God, and here's the prayer, right? Here's the prayer. Will the Lord reject forever? God, are you going to reject me forever? Will he never show his favor again? Sometimes it feels like that. Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? In other words, I know he did before, but what if that was the last time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he, in his anger, withheld compassion? Maybe he's angry with me. Listen, if you don't ask these questions, I don't know if you're a person. Because when things get difficult, it's real easy to go to God and say, you forgot me? Do you even know? Do you know what it's like? Have you been, I don't know if you've been down here lately, but it's not great. Like, are you mad at me? Did I do something? Because please tell me. Why won't you just tell me what I did so I can fix it so you can come back? Where are you, right? Man, I'm so thankful that there's a God who's big enough that we can talk crazy to him, right? Train, the 90s band put it this way, I need a sign to let me know you're here. all of these lines are being crossed over the atmosphere, I need to know if things are going to look up because I feel us drowning in a sea spilled from a cup. God, I need a sign. I need something. We rolled back into this town, and I'm penniless and poor, and I got this Moabite daughter-in-law, and maybe she's going to go work and find something, but I don't really know what our future holds, and I think you've forgotten me. I need something. I wrote this down. Favor is the visible reminder of God's kindness. That's what it is. Man, we got good kids. So my wife and I, we look at them and we go, how do we get these kids? What do we do to deserve it? We didn't. We didn't. It's God's visible reminder of his kindness toward us. In Georgia, it snows like one day a year. We didn't deserve that. Guys, that's God's visible reminder of his kindness toward us. I've got breath in my lungs today. There's no pollen in the air. That's God's visible reminder of his kindness toward us. I got a paycheck. That's God's visible reminder of his kindness toward us. I have someone who cares about, like, we can just go on and on and on and on and on, and we in our heart make it about us, but God's like, it's not about you, it's about me and how much I care about you. And see, no matter how dark it is, God has favor for those who feel forgotten. So when she says kindness, it's interesting. She references this. She says, and Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, this is that verse right there. She says, whose kindness, she's actually referencing an attribute of who God is. That word there is steadfast love and faithfulness. It's a mouthful. It's not just kindness. It's his covenant faithfulness with them. She's going, for the very first time, I feel the God of Israel. I don't just know about him intellectually. I feel him. I see him in my life. Exodus 34:6, God's telling his personal name to Moses. He says, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious. Gracious is chen, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. That's the word that she says. For the first time in my life, I know again that God's not forgotten me. Now, why did she say that? Is it only, right? Is it only because Ruth stumbles in the door with a great grocery haul? I mean, that's part of it. I mean, that was the like, oh, this is not how I thought it was going to go. This was like, oh, did you rob a bank? Because I don't care. This is great, right? Is this well, we need to steward this because who knows this is going to, like, what is it that turns the key to the lock of her bitter heart? What is it? It's a name, right? Isn't it a name? Look at what it says. She goes, who's this dude? Bless this guy. I don't care who he is, but thankfully he's here. And then she goes, the man's name with who I work today is Strength. It's Boaz. And Naomi goes, this man's a close relative of ours. And that matters, and I'll tell you next week why. He's one of our redeemers. He's not just any man of strength. He's our man of strength. And Ruth, he might be your man of strength. She's a mother-in-law, right? So she's like, Boaz, God remembered us. And the light goes on. Now, you might be sitting here and you're going, I've been through difficult time. I, too, understand hardship. I, too, am losing hope. But there's no guy named Boaz in my life. And I would say, you're right. There's not. I mean, maybe. If so, that's a weird name. But there is another name, right? There's another name where we see God turning on a light in the midst of our darkness. And it's true, I don't know what you're going through, and I don't know what you're losing hope for, and I don't know if you're looking at God and saying, where are you, and I need a sign, right? And you might be looking at your bank account, and you might be looking at your relationships, and you might be looking at your life, or your loss, or your hardship, and your situation, and you're going, it's not fair, and I don't understand what's going on. God, how do I know? I need a sign, and I'm not sure whether you'll get one physically or relationally or any of that. I don't know. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying there is a name, and that name is Jesus. And in that name, and in that person, we know that despite whatever we go through, right, there is favor for those who don't deserve it, can't afford it, and feel forgotten. Writing to a church, a guy put it this way in Titus 3:4. He says, For we ourselves were once foolish, disobedient, led astray, slaves to various passions and pleasures. We didn't deserve it. But when the goodness, that word there is hen, and loving kindness of our God, Savior, appeared, he saved us. Not because of works done by us in goodness or righteousness, but according to his own mercy. Why? Because God has favor on those who don't deserve it. He has favor for those who can't afford it. And he has favor for those who feel forgotten. It's not because you did anything. It's not because you earned it. It's not because you were perfect. It's not because you showed up at church this Sunday. It's because Jesus Christ died for it. That's why God has favor for you and me. Philip Yancey, the word hen in the New Testament is grace. He puts it this way: grace is heartfelt, tinged with love, a spillover gift of the God who extended undeserved favor toward us. And do you want to know what the good news of Jesus is? The good news of Jesus from Ruth towards you and me is this: that our failure doesn't negate God's favor. Doesn't. No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've come from, no matter what's happening to you, no matter whether you call it a failure or just being foolish, it doesn't negate God's favor, because it is in Jesus that we find that. It's because of him. You know, you could go back, and as the band comes up, you could go back through Ruth's story in chapter 2. You could put the same words of Ruth into the mouth of people who come to know the Lord, who say yes to Jesus. She goes, "Why have I, a foreigner, found mercy in your sight?" Man, I've wondered that about myself with God. Because if you knew my record, you'd be like, you don't deserve it, you can't afford it. And at times I've felt forgotten, right? I look at Jesus, I go, why? Why in the world? There's an old hymn writer who put it this way: I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, that's where he's from, and wonder how he could love me, a sinner, condemned, and unclean. God, how? How could I? And some of you are here and you're like, I don't deserve it. Because you have something in your life where you're like, man, if we're just talking about morality, I've been trying to work to make it up. And I don't think I can. I can't forget it, and I'm not sure other people can forget it. And so if it's up to me to like somehow be good enough for God, I can't be good. Well, it's not up to you. It's not. It is the goodness of Jesus Christ for you. And when he died, your old life died with it. And now, for some reason, God chooses to look at you and me through the lens of Jesus. Some of us are here and we're not financially poor, but we're spiritually poor. We can't afford it. Someone said, buy your way into heaven. You'd be like, I'm too broke. There's not enough in my heart to forgive that person. There's not enough in my heart to actually love my neighbor. There's not enough in my heart to actually care for my spouse when they've been that way to me. There's not enough in my heart to actually, I'm too poor. The bank account is broke. And God's like, I have an account that doesn't run out. It's not yours at all. It's mine. And he again and again and again every day fills it back up for those who are in Christ. So that we can forgive, we can love. Some of us feel forgotten. We're going, God, where are you? And I don't know, as a pastor, I can't tell you why you're going through what you're going through. I can't. I've been doing this 20 years. I don't got a great answer for that one. But I do know what it's not. It's not because he doesn't love you. It's not because he doesn't know where you are. The God of the universe knows you. He sees you. He's invited you to his table. He's broken his body and has spilled his blood for you so that you can sit with him and have that type of relationship and go, why am I here? Yeah, I don't know. Because he's good and he's faithful. Jesus Christ is the light for you and for me. There is a old slogan for Motel 6. And it goes like this. You're traveling across the country, looking for a place to stay before Airbnb. And Motel 6 says, don't worry. What do they say? If you're older, do you know this one? We'll leave the light on for you, right? Now, the opposite joke is you're going to want to turn it off when you get there. But we'll leave the light on for you. Listen, man, for you and me, in the midst of our darkness, God doesn't always give us a solution. Doesn't always give us an answer. But he has left the light on for us in Jesus Christ. And that's the good news. I'm going to pray for us. Father, I pray this morning that we as a church, in the midst of what we might think of as forever, that we might look at our life in this moment and go, it feels like forever. It feels like forever will be grieving. It feels like forever will be caring for a person. It feels like forever we'll be pouring ourselves out into ungrateful kids who can't seem to ever give us anything back. Lord, it feels like forever right now. Lord, would you remind us that it's not? Lord, would you give us endurance and hope and point us to one another? Would you remind us that your favor is for those who don't deserve it? It's for those who can't afford it. And especially for us when we feel forgotten. Show us your Son again. Show us yourself. God, whether that be through another follower of Jesus or through your word, God, give us this week, again, the good news of Jesus because we need it. And may we be quick to understand your heart and turn around and give it away to others as well. Amen.